Ocean Pines is a vibrant residential community nestled on Maryland's eastern shore. With over 9 miles of waterfront property, amenities like an 18-hole championship golf course and a public yacht club, and a rich history dating back to 1968. Of course, if you live here, you probably already know most of that, and if you don't, it's almost all apparent from your first visit. Each week on the Pines Cast, we work to bring out the ocean pines that might be less apparent. We celebrate the region, the amenities, and, most of all, the people who make and keep Ocean Pines a special place to live. Welcome to the Pines Cast, your source of news and insights about Ocean Pines and the official podcast of the Ocean Pines Association. This week on the Pines Cast, we have Jack Barnes, the former host of the popular web series Focus on the Pines, and we talk about the early days of Ocean Pines and how it's changed and how it's stayed the same over the last 4 decades, almost 5 decades. I remember Jack from when he was doing the show, and he is such an engaging guest. Lots of great stories to share, and more than a couple insights about how Ocean Pines is on the upswing, especially as the demographics of the community continue to change. It's a great episode. As always, if you would like to, and I would certainly like you to, email me, you can do so at bytonyrusso@gmail.com. That is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. In addition to comments, I'm taking suggestions. I would love to hear some of your stories and hopefully be able to share them on the show. This episode is special because it kicks off what I would like to see as a recurring feature that we're calling Lost in the Pines, about when the Pines was harder to get around. The street signs were harder to see and the street lights were non-existent, and everyone has a story about driving around in the middle of the night. Jack Barnes provides our first one, but certainly it won't be our last. It's a fun little reminiscence about how the community used to be. I've already talked too much, and you're already missing out too much on Jack, so we're going to turn it over to my conversation with Jack Barnes. So when I saw that you were coming up, all sorts of memories came back from me because I would follow your show. You were doing a video show when I was a reporter down there in the Ocean Pines area in Berlin at the Bayside Gazette. And I see now that you're on the Historical Society and all of those things. But if you don't mind, I'd like to get you to Ocean Pines before we talk about it. So can you tell me your experience coming to Ocean Pines, the first times, the early years?
Sure, Tony. Of course, I was a young married guy back then with 2 small children, and I used to come down to Ocean City with my parents, but we mainly came down to visit relatives. If you go way back, my relatives are from Smith Island, which a lot of people know out on the Chesapeake Bay, and a small town down on the eastern shore called Onancock, Virginia. And we'd come down to visit them, but my parents would prefer to stay in Ocean City, and we did. There was a point where I had an aunt and uncle that ran a Brown Derby out in Ohio, and they were interested in restaurant, hotel business. My parents at the time were interested in investing. This would have been early 1969. Of course, Boise Cascade opened Ocean Pines up in 68. But right where the beach club is and where the Grand Hotel is now was a nice little hotel called the Gateway. A lot of people remember the Gateway because they used to have the best body on the beach contest.
They faded that out in the 80s, I think, or maybe in the 90s.
Yeah, it was
I remember that.
It was Dr. Lenny Berger, who eventually went on to own the Clarion. But it was for sale at that time for about $1 million from what I remember.
Wow.
And Andrea and I were traipsing along, and my parents and my uncle, they were interested in buying it and wanted Andrea and myself to run it. And when it got serious, Andrea, and I kind of agreed with her, thought that raising 2 little boys in a restaurant motel environment may not be the best thing for us. So we kind of left with that thought. But on the way out, there was a sign in the lobby, and it said, "See the new Boise Cascade development, Ocean Pines." And caught my parents' eye. And they decided that, again, this was in 1969, pretty much just opened, that we'd take a look at it. And they thought they'd buy a lot. But first, we drove in the North Gate, and right to the right, we come in the North Gate. Boise had a sales, little cleared out area, was a sales operation and a trailer. We got in the car. We had our younger son, Jim, I think, was a little baby at that point. Andrea's carrying him. Our older son, Jack, was about 2 years old. We went out looking at lots. I remember that they looked at waterfront lots, which I think, Tony, at that time were selling for around $11,000. And they also looked at wooded lots, and they were about $5,000 a piece. And my dad's decision was kind of, do I want to have two lots in the woods for the same price and have a larger property? Because we came from a town outside of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania called Dallas, which was the back mountain, and your properties were pretty large, particularly relative to the small lots in the pines at the time. So I want two lots in the woods or one lot on the water. My mother kind of made that decision because she was afraid her grandchildren would fall in the canal. So we ended up, my dad, not we, not quite buying. Before that, Andrea and I are traipsing along behind my parents and the salesperson, and we drive up to where, the yacht club is now, and there'd be a sign, future home of the yacht club. And the salesman was telling my parents, I remember that, well, there's going to be a major highway bisecting Ocean Pines. Of course, that's now Route 90. Wasn't there then. Andrea and I are looking at each other and rolling our eyes like, okay, sure. And they did end up buying the lots, even though we thinking they might have been getting taken. And looking back, apparently, from what I understand, Boise Cascade was very successful with Ocean Pines. It was one of the few, because back in those days, the paper companies, the plywood companies, they were the ones putting up these developments so they could sell the plywood and when people built the homes. A lot of them went bankrupt, but Ocean Pines was one of the successful ones. So that's initially how we actually got started. 1969, bought the lots. My parents built their home in 1972. Everybody knew everybody back then, of course, because there was a limited amount of people. That was just the North Section 1 area. They were opened up first. And that's how we ended up with the lots and the home.
I remember when I was working on that 50th anniversary stories about just how kind of empty and desolate it was, especially back when there used to be an off season in Ocean Pines. And, the kids that were like, I don't know, 8 kids or 12 kids or whatever that would get together to go to school, but they would all have to walk to the same place to get picked up. How long before you decided you wanted to be there permanently? Were you coming down in the off season as well, or was it just a summer place when you first started coming down?
Well, I'll back up one section because I need to explain our initial opinion sometimes of Ocean Pines. When we were looking at lots, my parents, Andrea and I were following. We were on a wooded lot. Andrea's holding our baby Jim. Jack, who's 2-year-old toddler at the time, we're on the lot. He is not being good. He's being one of those restless toddlers, and the salesman's talking. Andrea said, swat him on the bottom. So I give him a swat on the bottom, didn't think much of it. We were in Philadelphia at the time, got back after 2.5 hours to Philly. She says, come here. She took my son's diapers off, and there was a frog in the diapers. And that's why he's moving around in the lot. And that's the things you remember when you come down. Now, there's another time my wife remembers extremely well. It was in the 70s. And you just mentioned how in those days, Ocean Pines was dark. The street signs, you see a lot of the old Kiwanis signs nowadays, they're brown. They're being replaced by of course, the fire department signs. They're brown with the orange lettering. That's what the street signs were back then. And we were living at that time in Pittsburgh. And like I said, this was, I think, around the mid-70s. But we decided we were going to max out our vacation in Ocean Pines. So we left at 6:30. We drove down. We didn't get into Ocean Pines until about 1:30 in the morning. And this place is dark, as you can imagine. There's not that many homes. It's dark. I live on Newport Drive, which is off Windjammer. Somehow I got lost. And I found out later I was in Bay Colony, which I think today there are still people in Bay Colony that can't get out once they get in it. Beautiful place, but once you get into Bay Colony, it can be a little difficult to find your way around. I finally found my way to Windjammer, where the entrance to Bay Colony. I was not sure. We had no clue. No lights were on. Of course, who's going to knock on a door at 1:30 in the morning? Fortunately, because of a friend of mine who worked for a telephone company, he had gotten us in Pittsburgh one of those first car phones, which had a unit in the back the size of a big suitcase and a big
Uh-huh.
stalk in the front. So I had a phone, and my wife still remembers having to call my mother, her mother-in-law, at 1:30 in the morning and tell her we're lost in Ocean Pines. We need to get to the home. And somehow, once she knew we were on Windjammer, she got us back up to Newport. My wife still remembers that to this day.
Jack, I have to tell you this story because I know he's listening and he's losing his mind now. My friend who does a podcast with me, his name is Todd DeHart, and he insisted that I needed to start a section of the podcast and call it Lost in the Pines. He said everybody has a story of coming to Ocean Pines and driving around lost. So congratulations. That is the first you just I was going to ask you later. So this is our first installment of Lost in the Pines featured Jack Barnes.
I'm glad to hear that because I think when you get my age, we get lost all over again in the pines.
Well, the
But
last several guests have been too new to really get lost, but you sealed the deal because I have it written right here on my notes. Ask him about being lost in the pines, and you beat me to it.
well, I had a couple of notes myself because, like I said, you remember pieces of things in your past that for
Right.
some reason you remember. I asked the boys. One owns a security company up in Ocean View, Delaware. The other's a pilot at Southwest Airline. Back then, there were young kids coming down here. I said, "What do you remember?" Well, they remember fishing in the golf course pond, which is still a no-no, and they got chased out of there. They remember a lot about going down at 5 in the morning to the swimming racket club and crabbing, which a lot of kids love. And of course, in those days, you didn't really measure them. I hope the DNR is not listening. Then they remember the Boise Cascade had these, I guess, there was these big wooden structures that were like a playground. And there was one at the yacht club. It was the pirate ship. I always remember going over and playing on the pirate ship. There was another one. I forget what it was shaped like, maybe a fire engine or something, probably at Whitehorse Park. Sometimes they remember things too long. Jim, my son up the beach, see him a little more. He was picked up by the police, taking a boat down through Whitehorse Park. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well,
Huh.
that's how we always put the boat in." Because you did. In those days, your access to the boat ramp was through Whitehorse Park. The road is still there. But he's doing it in like 2000 and whatever, 19, and didn't realize that, oh, I can't do that. I used to do that years ago and put the boat in. But that's the problem sometimes of memory, even of younger folks. Then there was what we call the guard wave. They had a security guard at the gate, but you learned how to kind of make that special wave like you knew him, and he kept going and you didn't have to stop.
Right.
And that was a security guard. We remember well the dining. I mean, it was a big deal selling lots down here for Boise. I mean, I'm sure the realtors would tell you this place was hot, kind of like massive timeshares, planes coming down,
Yeah.
free dinners, whatever. But the yacht club at the time, they wanted it really to be like fine dining. We thought we would go to dinner, but we weren't sure what it was new. So we said, let's go over to lunch. It was just myself and Andrea, and we had a couple friends we had down here that we met. So about 4 or 5 of us. We went over for lunch. I remember I paid the bill, and I scribbled something on the bill, my else besides my name. I don't know what it was. And the server came back, and she kind of laughed. She says, "You a doctor?" I says, "Yeah, right." I said, "I'm a doctor." Right. We decided we liked the lunch. We come back for dinner. I got to tell you, Tony, in those days, it was fine dining. You dressed. I wore a coat. As my wife said, she wore a dress. They had at your table after when you made your reservation, you came in. They had little matchbooks, and they were black, and they had gold engraving with your name on it. And it wasn't that nice.
Mm.
And I sit down and I pick up mine, and it says Dr. Barnes. Because I kidded about that, and I guess I thought I was a doctor.
That's
But
fantastic.
it was very upscale. They wanted to impress you that this was the place to be. We enjoyed the meal.
And especially if you hadn't purchased yet.
Yes, good point. Especially if you hadn't purchased yet, no doubt about that.
Along those lines, you talked about the planes coming in. Did you ever make the boat trip to Ocean City and back? Was that, or were you before that big? Because I thought that was a big sales point.
Well,
They
of
would take
course, you're
trips
absolutely
there.
right. The ocean is why everybody's down here. It's that ocean. And they had a paddle wheeler called the Amy Ross. If you go over to the Swim and Racket Club now and you see a slot over there, like a big slip, you can see it, look out the pool.
Yeah.
They had it docked in there, I think, but they also kept it. There was a sales office over there on it's either Harborview or Widow's Watch, and it was Marty Groff that told me it had burnt down, so it's not there anymore. When I was trying to figure out where things were, the Amy Ross would come over there. The Swim and Racket Club, I think, was why they really were getting that thing done, because hey, you have that to look at, and you have the
Right.
engineering office was over there. That's over there on the corner of Harborview, right at West Harborview. It's now a home. But the Amy Ross, I've never on it. It's all pictures of it. But it was a big deal because it'd take people from, over the sales office, Women Racket Club, over to the ocean, which most people
Mm.
understand now. That's why we have that piece of property next to Secrets. That's quite valuable. That was where it landed and selling all the time. They had seminars and whatever, but they're pretty good at selling. And I think they had a good product, but of course, everybody was questioning at the time. And I'm sure 5,000 and 11,000 for waterfront sounded like it was the moon for some people. But it moved on and through different eras of lack of sewer and lack of sales and things to what it is today, where people are, I think, wondering, wow, look at the prices of the homes here, and we're a very desirable area. I'll say one thing, and it's a recent thing.
Yeah.
You could make a case that we are in one of the best spots relative to weather in the country. If you think about tornadoes, wildfires, hurricanes, even up in Delaware, those fronts come from west to east. They hit the mountains, they start sliding northeast. And I don't know if you notice it, but we really don't have, while we worry about hurricanes, we seem to have been very fortunate over all the many years. I hesitate to say that because I'll jinx us, but it's been a great place.
No, it's something that I say myself. Even so, I live in Del Mar, and I don't like living in Del Mar, and I never have. And I've always said that I'm going to move, and I've been saying that I'm going to move for the last 30 years. And now, well, the mortgage is paid off. Why would I bother? But I keep saying, you know what? There'll be rain here in 20 years, and I guess that'll be worth the price of admission
That's
itself.
true. You got to be careful there. I have a relative, Norris Barnes, that lives in Delmar. So, I want to tell him that Delmar is a beautiful place.
But Del Mar is a wonderful place. It's just not a wonderful
I
place
got it.
for me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail
No,
your
you did it.
story. Did you want to talk about when you decided to move down permanently and what that kind of decision, what went into that? And was it something you were waiting to have the opportunity to do, or was it something that the moment you had the opportunity you did it, or something you planned out over a long period of time?
It's an excellent question. I hadn't even thought you would ask something like that. It was initially not an easy decision. We were in Pittsburgh and had been in Pittsburgh for about 30 years, getting close to retirement, and too much snow shoveling in Pittsburgh, as wonderful a town as it was to raise our children in and have our businesses in. Florida came to mind, and the Carolinas. I had relatives in the Carolinas that came to mind. Hurricanes came to mind. Probably like a lot of folks that are down here from particularly Baltimore area, or whether it be DC or whatever. You've come down here. You're familiar with it. And it
Right.
just popped in. Well, what about Ocean Pines? Why not Ocean Pines? And I had a wife too. It was always like a two-person decision. We decided, okay, we'll do it. I mean, it's hard enough deciding when to retire as it is in our particular professions. I was a financial planner at the time. Andrea was a realtor. We could kind of choose our time. We made that decision about 21 years ago, I guess, and said, okay, we'll move down. We actually, when my parents passed away, we actually had a home on the market to sell it.
Wow.
And that was something, suddenly it was surprised me. Andrea, my wife, said, I don't think we can do this. I don't think we can sell it. We've been coming down too long. And that sort of, okay, I knew she was on board. We came down, did a little remodeling about, like I said, 20 some years ago. And I've been here ever since, enjoyed it. Ocean Pines is a great place. It really is. It has its drama, but you have the tourist, you have the off season, I like the season change, frankly, without all the equipment. I had to remove snow in Pittsburgh. I
Mm,
enjoyed that. Was another thing. I liked the change of season somewhat. I didn't need to have constant Florida type weather, even though I enjoyed Florida.
right.
But that's that's how we ended up in Ocean Pines, and I'm very glad we did.
And now, once you were here, so 21 years ago is when I was, you got involved very, very quickly. And I like I said, I remember you doing the show. How did that come about? And how did you get in that, and say, hey, I'm going to start doing this? I'm sorry, everyone knows about the show. I'm sorry that I don't know whether it's still on.
No,
Is it
we
still on?
discontinued that. We
Oh,
felt
okay.
after about must have been close to 100. It was online. It was 20 minutes video, and I think we were getting to the point where people were into shorter type things. We might have been getting a little burnt
Right.
out somewhat. I got into it because I was at a board meeting, and I guess this is about 10, 15 years ago, Tony. I'm not quite sure. And I was upset because I saw that they were using the swim and racket club over where the little dock is by the tennis courts. It was being used as a construction zone almost continually. And I thought, okay, I'll go speak my piece. I did. Not much came of that until later when a group of neighbors across the way got together and they had a bigger voice and probably a more intelligent voice than mine. That's when that did, to Ocean Pines' credit, they changed. It's no longer a permanent site with bulkhead material all over the place and pilings and were not really usable. At that meeting was Mr. Reynolds, Joseph Reynolds, who has the Ocean Pines Forum. I don't know what he saw in me, but
No offense intended. You look like a newscaster. That
I
probably
don't
had
know.
something to do
I
with
don't think
it.
so. But he said, how would you like to do a show in Ocean Pines? After telling him he was crazy, I said, what? And we sat down and talked about it. And I don't know if you remember Chris Matthews. He's rather controversial.
Mm,
And I remember
yeah,
saying, I'm
no.
not doing any Chris Matthews type shows, Joe. I said, okay. Well,
Because for those who don't remember, Joe Reynolds was not afraid to
oh
poke
my God,
the
yes.
hornet's
He's
nest.
still not afraid. Poke the hornet's nest. Um, but that's how we started. I got to tell you, I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of work for a while getting ready. It was done in Joe Reynolds' home on Watertown Road, right on beautiful place, right on the creek. He's a whiz. I know a lot of people. You got to interview Joe some days. I mean, the guy has stuff in the Smithsonian. He really knows how to handle audio, microphones, whatever. He's just that kind of a person, and it makes you
Okay.
more comfortable as a interviewer if you know that's going to go well. And I think the first show we did was Dave Blazer on coastal bays, and a lot of others. Ocean Pines has a wealth of individuals that have some very interesting back. It's everybody from World War II, fighter pilots, bombers, Army, people that headed up the National Congressional Library in Washington, D.C., Olympians, former Olympians. It just amazing once you start looking into it. It didn't have that many problems. Of course, we always, at the time, interviewed the head of the board, the new board president for Ocean Pines, and people seemed to enjoy them at the time. And we did them for quite a few years until we felt maybe it's the time to move on. Podcaster taking over.
Yeah. We are kind of coming up against it, and again, the show is called Focus on the Pines, and I'm sure it's got to still be on YouTube. It's got to be able the
Yeah, Joe
archives are
Reynolds on
somewhere.
the Ocean Pines Forum,
Hmm,
oceanpinesforum.com. He has all the videos. He has recently just moved them all to YouTube, for better or for
that's
worse. So they
great.
will
That's
they will
great.
be there. And every once in a while, it's fun pull one up when they're talking about things in the pines because if you've been around here long enough, for a lot of those people that have been in the pines, you cycle through whether it be sidewalks, street lights, all these different things. And they probably roll their eyes where somebody knew and said, "Oh, that sounds good. Why don't we have street lights in Ocean Pines?"
Because if we had streetlights, then I wouldn't get to do my Lost in the Pines section. That's why.
Very good. That is good. And my wife always says it has everything from big wheels to wheelchairs. And you can have a millionaire living right next to someone on a limited income. It's very inclusive because a lot of the homes, initially it was, I would say, an upper middle class type sale.
Sure.
Second
Yeah.
home. There came a point in time in Ocean Pines where I think Ocean Pines became the affordable housing. A lot of young people didn't mind living in a smaller home that was they could consider a vacation home. And so you got very eclectic type of a community. I think that, it didn't happen on purpose, but I think it's good for Ocean Pines. I don't know too many communities like that. I mean, we do have our wealthy, obviously, communities like Turns, and I'm in Section 1. I always kid we're in the low income to those people, but it's great. And it's unique in that half of Ocean Pines is non-resident. So, it's kind of quiet. Even in the height of the tourist season, people are going to the beach, and I bike a lot around, and it's not really a lot of heavy traffic and crowds, and we're within reach of the Walmarts, the Home Depots, the whatever. Yet we have kind of a 65% of Worcester County is wooded, and a lot of woods in Ocean Pines as well. So it's really just has pretty much everything you could want. Does a lot for kids. Great school system outside. I mean, it really is. I think a excellent place. I shouldn't say that. Get too many people trying to move in. Keep it to ourselves. But I tell the county commissioners. I mean, Chip Bertino, a friend of mine, of course, he owns the Courier. I said, we don't want to push for, sometimes everybody says, look what's happening up in Delaware and Sussex County. How come we're not growing like that? I'm happy we're not growing like that. It's going to catch up with them eventually. I like things like, I don't want to be, okay, we're here. I don't want anybody else here, but we don't need to encourage a lot of development. But we're a great place. I think we're the second largest community in the Eastern Shore to Salisbury. So we got the size and we got the amenities. We have overall, while it does provide some entertainment, we've had very good management over the years. And while some people deride the fact that it's an HOA and I have to follow the rules, I think that's a positive. And we're almost run on a zero cash basis because we don't have bonds out like a municipality would have. Our debt's handled next year, depending on what the budget looks like. So all in all, I think with all the problems and issues we do have and have to sort of handle, we're very fortunate in just living in Ocean Pines. And of course, we have that ocean right near us where we all came here to begin with.
Excellent. And I usually at the end ask if there's something I didn't get a chance to talk about, but we didn't get a chance to talk about all the things that I wanted to ask, let alone all the things that you wanted to ask. So we will definitely have to have you back before too long. But is there one story left that you definitely wanted to tell before we called it a day here?
I forgot you're going to ask me that. I'll tell a story going way back. Andrea, when we moved down, Andrea was the number 2 realtor in the United States for Prudential. Big time realtor. We can move to Ocean Pines, and of course, she's not working anymore, and decided not to become a realtor down here. At the time, we heard there were problems at the yacht club. And that was, again, about 20 some years ago. And I don't know why she gets it in her head. She decides she's going to apply for a job as a server at the yacht club to find out what the problems were. Like she's going to kill me for this story. She went for an interview, and they said, you sure? People in Ocean Pines are kind of tough. I don't know if that's the word they used or rude or whatever, but she thought it meant like they grabbed you or something like that. And Andrea would never find anybody that was a problem anyway. She actually used to be a server when we first got married back in the good old days and she was serving up until she was 9 months pregnant, which I guess must have helped tips. But that's a wife story that was kind of big at the time. I was thinking about doing some business down here. We decided not to in the end. She decided it would be better to move on and eventually got involved with the Mid-Atlantic Symphony and became the president of the Mid-Atlantic Symphony. I went off and did a lot of therapy dog work, which, to be honest with you, one of the things down here I'm proud of is the years I spent with the nursing home, the developmental center, and the reading dog at Shell Elementary School. I met so many wonderful people, and I still do in Ocean Pines. It's still fun to go out and meet new people that are moving in. Half the place is non-residents, so we look forward now to them all coming in and meeting new people. We usually lower the average age of Ocean Pines probably about 5 or 10 years
By July.
which is great. And there's a lot of folks I have seen recently during COVID, I guess, that have actually really improved the Pines. I mean, there was so much pressure on housing, even homes that, we all have some, we say, oh, I wish they'd fix that up. They couldn't get a house. People are fixing them up. They're coming from New York, New Jersey. And the appearance of the Pines, I think, has really improved quite a bit. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but a lot of the places that needed some attention have gotten fixed up. And I bike around, I see this, and it's really great. People are friendly here, and we're very fortunate, I think, again, to live here. And better stop there. It sounds like I'm selling lots in Ocean Pines.
Right. And you're not going to get one nickel in commission. But thank you so much for your time. And like I said, we hope to have you back.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I did appreciate it. Tony, you do a wonderful job. You really do. And I had a little trepidation about doing this interview, but I'm glad I did, and hope I don't have to listen to myself, though. Thank you again.
The Pines Cast is an Ocean Pines Association production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo, executive producer, Josh Davis. Please subscribe wherever you are listening now, or follow along if you are on Apple. And if you like the show, please tell someone else about it, because that's the best way to get the word out. As I mentioned at the beginning, it would be fantastic if you sent in your feedback. I would love to keep this conversation going. If you'd like to send me an email to be read, you can send me an email to be read. If you would like to record a voice memo and email me that voice memo, I'd be happy to play it if it is appropriate and possible, especially if you have a good Lost in the Pines story. I think that would be a nice supplement to some of the things we're doing here. Anyway, you can email me. My email address is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. That is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. And that is all for this week on the Pines Cast.